technical difficulties. And this should be Cobalt's official webinar, and it's Cobalt and Interfaith are working together on this event. And so I'm going to just make sure I have a few people already. The agenda that we have for today, we're going to go through 4 bills. We're going to start with the gender identity bill. We'll have panelists. They will give a little overview of who they are, and then you'll get a chance to ask questions of them about themselves. My name is Sam Carwin, she, her, hers, and I'm the educator and advocate for Interfaith Alliance of Colorado. And I will let Justine and Mel introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Justine Sandoval. I'm the statewide engagement director for Cobalt Advocates. We work on access to abortion, access to reproductive rights, the whole gamut. So we've been an organization here in the state, and we work mainly in the state level, but also on the federal level. And I'm so happy to be here. Oh, also she, her, hers, sorry about that. And I'm really excited to have joined with Interfaith today to talk about these very important bills, and I'm excited. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Justine. My name is Melanie Kessner. I'm the Public Policy Director of the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado. Thrilled to be here with you all today. The Interfaith Alliance of Colorado brings people together across diverse religions and backgrounds to work towards equal rights, inclusion, and opportunity for all. So we're thrilled to be co-sponsoring this event with Cobalt, very close partners of ours as we work in reproductive justice and reproductive health. And I'm going to pass it back to Sam to talk about what these terms mean. Also, my apologies, I forgot, my pronouns are she, her, hers. Again, thank you so much for joining us.
How we formed this event today, and the definition or the breakdown that I'm going to give you, excuse me, is the thinking of reproductive justice as bodily autonomy. And we're going to talk about a bill that specifically focuses on bodily autonomy, about one's ability to have children. And we'll talk about a bill that focuses on that, one's ability to not have children in a specific bill, and then to parent in safe and supportive communities. So that's the way we're going to break it down today into the different bills and the different pieces of reproductive justice. Justine, did you want to add a little bit?
Sure. Just a little bit from us of what our different organizations within our coalition focus on different areas that we all work together to help advance reproductive health, rights, and justice all together. One of the big things for us is reproductive health care, which is just the basic health care you receive regarding your reproductive lifetime. The World Health Organization describes reproductive health as not only a state of physical health, but also mental and social well-being when it comes to all matters relating to your reproductive system. So one of the big things is it includes abortion access, but also birth control, access to pregnancy care, postpartum care, the whole gamut of your reproductive rights. And what we really do as an organization is make sure that we're breaking down any barriers or restrictions to that access. So I like to think of a lot of what we do. We see Planned Parenthood and other healthcare providers as where you get that healthcare, and it's really our job to be the muscle politically in order for you to be able to access that care. So that's a lot of what we really work on, and really uplifting the community to be able to fight for those reproductive rights and that healthcare access.
Thank y'all so much for breaking that down. So the first bill that we're going to talk about is focused on bodily autonomy. So I will bring up our panelists for that, and I will let them introduce themselves. They'll spend a couple minutes introducing themselves. Justine will ask them a few specific questions, and then you attendees will get an opportunity to ask questions. So just give me 1 minute and I will pin our amazing panelists. I will let y'all know one of our storytellers, Ev, was going to be on the panel today, and unfortunately they weren't able to make it. They are not feeling well. So I will just ask our other panelists if there's specifics that you know about individuals who are accessing care, who are under that trans identity, and how that discrimination has affected them. I'm just going to ask that you answer that. So let me pin our two amazing panelists. All right. So I'll let y'all introduce yourselves and then Justine will take over.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Cruz. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the policy director for One Colorado. One Colorado, we were founded about, 11 years ago, and we are the state's leading nonpartisan advocacy organization for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer Coloradans and their families. So, we primarily focus in the space of trying to advance policy measures to help close the gap between legal lived equality for our state's LGBTQ community.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jordan Blisk. My pronouns are he and him. I am an associate director of chapters for the American Constitution Society. I also have the privilege of sitting on the boards for the Colorado LGBT Bar Association and the Minority Veterans of America, in addition to serving as the executive director for the Colorado Name Change Project, which is a local nonprofit that exists to meet the financial and legal resource needs that the Colorado trans and non-binary community have when it comes to legal transition. And so we do that through kind of a variety of methods, offering monthly workshops, information available on our website, petition generators, micro grants. We try to kind of cover the whole spectrum of what it takes to help someone legally transition.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for being here today and sharing your knowledge with us. I have a few questions here we have regarding HB 1108, which is the Gender Identity Expression Anti-Discrimination Bill that concerns bodily autonomy. So my first question here is for Michael. Sorry, my little dog is barking in the background. Is for Michael. What populations are supported through this legislation?
Yeah, so the interesting thing here is that the bill really looks at what we classify as protected classes in the state. So this bill is not, even though we add in specific language related to the LGBTQ community, we just went into existing sections of our law under the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, where people were already protected for their religious beliefs, their ethnic identity, their national origin, these categories that we know have such intrinsic value to individuals' identities. One of the areas that was included and has been included since the act was originally enacted back in 2008 was a definition of sexual orientation. So that was already included under the Anti-Discrimination Act. So what we did with this bill was we just went in and updated that definition to be something that's more modern and kind of recognizes the true experience of someone's sexual orientation. We additionally added in, for the first time in statute, clear definitions of gender identity and gender expression to fully make sure that we are encapsulating somebody's lived experiences in relation to areas where they may face discrimination based off of who they are and how they identify and express themselves.
That's great. And it's great to see this when we see all over the rest of the country bills the exact opposite of this. It makes you thankful that we are taking proactive steps to protect people here in Colorado. Thank you for that. So Jordan, this question is for you. What recourse do individuals have when they are in a protected class?
Yeah, so, and Michael really covered this well, so I think I'll probably end up repeating a little bit of what he said here, but if you're discriminated against because you're a member of a protected class, what it means is that you have legal recourse against the person or persons who did that illegal discrimination against you. Specifics as to what that recourse looks like, it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. It varies a lot depending on the context of the discrimination. So, were you kicked out of an apartment? Were you fired? Were you denied medical care? And it also depends on, what happened as a result of that discrimination. So what sort of negative effects did you suffer? Was it a loss of wages? Was it physical injury, et cetera? But like generally speaking, there are several layers of governmental protection for LGBT people between federal, state, and local laws. And as Michael mentioned, CADA, the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, is the Colorado state law that broadly protects Colorado residents from discrimination in the big areas that we kind of exist in throughout our everyday lives. So housing, education, healthcare, public accommodations, and like he said as well, it's really important to note that these protections already existed in state, federal, and local laws, including CADA, and they exist right now. Sexual orientation, as he said, was already included. Gender identity was included under that. And so this bill, what it really does is just modernize that language and really clarifies what sort of conduct is prohibited and specifically who is protected. And as you kind of added at the end too, I think it's really important to touch on the national backdrop that this bill is coming up against, because first of all, we're really getting in line with other states. There are 21 other states that have full non-discrimination protections that include gender identity explicitly, and there are 16 others that are considering some sort of legislation that would do the same. But right now, we are also seeing a record year, and unfortunately, it feels like every year is a record year for anti-trans bills since about 2016 or so. And this year is the first year that we've seen them introduced in more than half of the states during a given year's legislative session. Right now, 33 out of our 50 states are considering anti-trans legislation of some form that largely specifically against trans kids. There's about 100 bills out there trying to kind of chip away at trans rights in various forms. And so I think while this bill here in Colorado isn't really a groundbreaking extension of civil rights for trans folks, it is really a powerful message that's being sent from the Colorado legislature that says, we see you, we hear you, you deserve to be protected, and we want to do this the right way. We recognize that gender identity is separate from sexual orientation, and that legal distinction matters. So.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's so important now too, especially when we do these types of training, to make sure that people are elevating those voices so we can continue to move this fight forward and make progress in these areas. Are there examples that either of you want to share about how the bill impacts situations of discrimination that you may have experienced or seen firsthand? Or anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
I can kind of talk about it from that 30,000 foot level in terms of discrimination experiences. I think at the most basic level, and Jordan was just kind of getting at this as well, it's just like this basic recognition from the General Assembly that these terms matter, because like through the Civil Rights Commission, where if you had a claim, everybody's kind of familiar with the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, and that was brought up in the course of working to pass this legislation as well. But these avenues of recourse already recognize this terminology, but it gets to the point where it's like this regulatory body recognizes it, but the general public doesn't recognize that they maybe already had these protections. One place where we looked for data outside of our own on lived experiences was looking at the collection of hate crime numbers in the state, and seeing this kind of slow increase that we've experienced kind of across the board in the state. But for instance, back in 2017, there were 0 instances reported of somebody being attacked due to their gender identity. And then last year we saw a 49% increase. And what we're talking about is an increase of like 2 to 3 cases a year. But when we talk about hate crimes numbers in our work, we always understand that there's this underreporting that takes place. So more people definitely had those experiences than what were reported, but it's also this understanding that people's own understanding what their gender identity means. So it's getting that message out and exposing folks to that, to understand that this does have intrinsic value to who they are. So kind of on that 30,000 foot level take on that. Yeah.
Sorry, on mute. You think you would learn after a year of Zoom. Thank you so much for that. Do we have any questions from the audience? And if not, I'll go ahead and pass it back to Sam. Oops, I apologize. One moment. Hey, Sam, did we want to take questions? Or are we going to jump into the
If there are
next?
any questions that people have, if you go down to your chat, there's a box that you can say all panelists or just attendees. And so you can send a question directly to the panelist. A question that I had that I'll jump in, can you talk a little bit about what places? I feel like Jordan talked a little bit about that, but when we say anti-discrimination, what are the places where someone would actually be able to file? You said housing was one. Are there other particular systems?
Yeah. So kind of the major categories that I mentioned when you look at civil rights protection generally encompass things like education, making sure that the folks in school are able to focus on learning, housing, big one, that you can't be denied a rental or kicked out or something like that simply because of your identity. Employment, that's a huge one, especially for trans folks. We're unemployed at somewhere between about 2 and 3 times the national average, and that was pre-COVID. And that number only gets worse when you start adding, layers of intersection, specifically race, on top of that. And then, public accommodations is another big one. Masterpiece, obviously, is kind of the big example there of that one. And then healthcare is generally the kind of other large area that we're talking about. So to make sure that, if you're having a heart attack on the side of the road, that an EMT can't come up and say, "Oh no, trans person, I'm done, not helping." So it's really these vital areas of life, these really big things that really, without institutional access to those things in a free and fair and dignified way, it really prevents trans people from not only living their best lives, but often living lives.
And I can add one piece onto the health insurance piece, because this actually came up in relation to a bill that we testified in support of yesterday, where back in 2013, we as a state were still in the process of fully implementing the Affordable Care Act, but our Division of Insurance had issued a bulletin telling insurance carriers not to discriminate against somebody based on their sexual orientation or what was considered back then transgender status, which we consider gender identity now correctly. And it took until 2017 for all the plans on our state exchange to have these protections in place, or even not to say that they were protections, but these policies that were not clearly discriminatory. And still 8 years later, we have people that contact us, and we work with partner orgs like the Colorado Consumer Health Initiative that are still denied specific care and coverage. And where we see this predominantly is with members of the transgender community with gender affirming care and that access. So even though we had a bulletin, we had the ACA come through, we still interact with people on a regular basis that have these types of discriminatory experiences. So the bill won't eliminate them, but at least we have the structure in place to deal with these types of concerns when they come up and ensure that people do have that fair and equal access to services.
Thank you so much. So at this point, we are gonna, unless Michael or Jordan, you had anything else to add? Last things. If anyone has any other questions, please throw them in chat and we might jump back around. But at this point, we're gonna move on to our second group of panelists. And I will be one. And so Justine will facilitate once again, and then we will do our introductions and all of that as well. So just
Perfect. Okay, it's me again, everyone. So next bill that we're talking about this afternoon is the Equal Access to Services for Outside of Home Placements, a bill securing the right to have children, HB 1072. We'll go ahead and let all the panelists introduce themselves. Michael, you already introduced yourself, unless you want to go again, but we can go ahead and Sam and then Candace, and then we'll jump into questions.
So as mentioned earlier, Sam Carwin, she, her, hers. My connection to this topic, I was a foster parent for 5 years back in Nebraska. I do identify as part of the community, and I had the privilege to have an array of young people in my house, some who did identify as LGBTQ. So for me, this is not only personal as being a foster parent, I also am an adoptee. I was adopted when I was 4 via kinship. So this is full circle for me to go from being a foster kiddo to now getting an opportunity to be a foster parent has been quite an amazing experience.
And my name is Candace Woods. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a consultant for issues around gender and sexuality justice. I am a comprehensive sexuality educator, and I'm in the process of ordination in the United Church of Christ. I'm also have over a decade of experience working with youth and young adults in Colorado Springs. And I am also connected to this issue because I would love to be a foster parent. I'm looking at starting that process soon. And my partner and I just bought a house and are finally feeling settled in a space where we are able to do that. And so I'm excited about being able to access foster care systems in order to provide a safe and affirming home for especially for LGBTQ plus young people in our community. And so that's what brings me here today.
That is wonderful. Thank you all for being here today. And we'll go ahead and start with a question for Michael. When this bill was developed, what was the motivator behind this bill?
I think the overarching motivator was this understanding that we knew that discriminatory activity was taking place in 2 sections. The first in kind of this organizational sense, where LGBTQ foster parents would go through the process, and they would not have the experience that they would have if they did not identify as LGBTQ. Not to a specific service provider or a specific entity, but we just had this information that these experiences were taking place. The more concerning one for us, and this comes from some of our previous work with banning conversion therapy, is the harm that discriminatory activity can have on a youth that's placed in the family that's unaffirming. And that's harm that cannot be easily addressed or mitigated in the future. So it's about making sure that we were taking these kids and putting them in places where they could ultimately succeed. The other environmental piece or piece in the universe that we were dealing with was that for the past few years, and particularly in the last year of the Trump administration, which was in 2020, when we were really working on the core of this bill, is that they took directed efforts to try to remove existing federal protections as well. So we really wanted to make sure that, at least in the state of Colorado, regardless of what happens on the federal level, our youth were protected in addition to our foster parents.
Thank you. And this next question is for Sam. Sam, how do you see this bill supporting religious freedom here in Colorado?
I'm going to jump in after Candace and say I'm in school working towards my MDiv, and I plan on getting ordained with an MCC. And so my faith is very important to me. And when I lived in Nebraska, it was consistently emphasized that our faith is our faith. And so recognizing that we have to honor the faith of every young person that comes into our home, which may align with ours and may not. For me, that's what this religious freedom part is really about, is that the young people have freedom to practice their faith, knowing they've likely lost a lot of their connections. It's important for them to be able to maintain that religious connection regardless of whose home they're in. So for me, that was really important. When young kids were in my house, we always asked, hey, do you want to go to church? I ran the youth program, so we did a lot of zoo trips and movie nights, and they knew that that was optional. If they did not want to, that was perfectly fine, but it was a choice for them to make, not one that I as a foster parent got to make.
That's great. And that's so important when we're working on the health of the well-being of the whole person, having those choices. So thank you for that. And then this next question that we have is for Candace. And the question is, are there ways that this bill can prevent particular circumstances?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I'm thinking of myself with regards to this bill. It's the lens I'm taking. I'll speak to my more professional experience in a second. But personally speaking, I'm in a straight passing relationship, but unmarried, and there are situations in which that might be a determining factor for some placement agencies to potentially place with me and my partner. And so considering that, like being able to know that I will be accepted as a foster parent regardless of my marital status, regardless of my sexual orientation, is really important to me, and knowing that I will be able to show up as my full self in those spaces and as a foster parent. But I'm also thinking specifically about trans young people in our communities who I've worked with LGBTQ plus young people for years now in the community, most recently in the Queer Youth Center here in Colorado Springs. And thinking about trans young people, non-binary young people, agender and gender fluid young folks who might be in care of the foster care system, wanting them to be able to access care that is appropriate for them, and being able to have access to homes and to parents who have been trained on how to use pronouns and what are these different gender identities that we recognize in the community and that young people are identifying as, and how important that is to be affirmed in those spaces. We know that trans young people who are affirmed and who are in a space where their name and their pronouns are respected are 56% less likely to die by suicide. And that is an incredible statistic. We know that using proper pronouns and names is suicide prevention. That's mental health care. And so being able to access homes and placements that are affirming of those young people, and being able to access other services in the community is really important. And so I think too, the piece there around training for foster parents is really, really vital. Being able to support foster parents in to be able to welcome in the whole child, the whole young person that is coming into their home. You know, with my theological training, I think about chosen family a lot, and also being in queer community, chosen family is something we talk about, and think of the story of Ruth and Naomi in the Hebrew scriptures and the ways in which they chose one another, and they welcomed and accepted each other for all that they were. And thinking about families, when we accept children into our lives, whether that is by birth or through foster care or adoption, we are accepting that whole child with all of their strengths and gifts and beauty that they bring to the world, and also their challenges and their struggles and their traumas that they may have experienced. And so really being able to provide training that is accessible and informing for parents.
Thank you so much for really highlighting just, that affirmation being that simple act, really developing who you are and really creating a better life for a child, just to be able to confirm who they are as a person. That is so valuable. Thank you for that. And we have a question actually for Sam that just came in. Sam, what would you say to people saying that it's their religious freedom to discriminate against LGBTQ people?
I think ultimately how we choose to carry ourselves in our day-to-day life should not impact young people. I recognize that our values are our values and our beliefs are our beliefs, and those are protected in a variety of ways, but you are choosing to bring a child into your home. And there's an expectation when you do that you're honoring that child first, not your own self and your own values or selfish reasons for wanting that child in your home. So that has to be your priority, is that young person, not yourself. And ultimately, that's a choice you're making. If you want to be a foster parent, that's a box that you need to check, is that you're willing to not only welcome a young person into your home, but like Candace was saying, do the training that you need to do and honor that young person and talk to them. I was amazed the things that I read in a report that would come over for a foster kid. And then what I would learn in the first 5-10 minutes of that conversation, how much of that report was accurate or not, based off the fact that the caseworker didn't have that vocabulary, or that young person didn't feel comfortable talking to that caseworker about the situations that they were in. I know we've mentioned the risk factors for young people, but I also think about the sibling relationships. I had a young person who came into my home. They were in a previous home with two of their siblings. That particular foster parent was not an open and inclusive home. They were looking for other placement that would be comfortable having a young trans girl in their home. So they asked me, I said, yes, of course. But because of that, they were separated from two of their siblings who they had helped raise. Unfortunately, they had helped raise, but that was very difficult, not only for the young person in my home, but for the two siblings that not already lost their parents, but this was their big sister. And hearing from that foster parent, the negativity that they were then saying to those young people and how that impacted their relationship with their own sibling, to me was really heartbreaking. So it wasn't just that one kiddo that was affected, it was all the relationships around that kiddo. And we can't go back in time. Once that damage is done, we can't really undo it, to help those kids understand that there are welcome and loving faith communities and religious trauma exists. So for me, the priority is always the young person. And if you can't go into foster care and make the young person the priority, then you probably should just go adopt something else. Go find another way to fill that need to have loudness in your home.
Thank you for that. And thank you for your compassion. You're willing to work with young people, Sam. It's really inspiring. So do we have any other questions from the audience? We're a little, I think, ahead of time, but go ahead and submit any questions into the Q&A or directly into the chat. And if there's anything else any of the panelists would like to share, please feel free. Anything that you think is helpful information regarding this bill, things people should know, the floor is yours.
I'll just add on to what Candace had highlighted, is that the protections that we have in this bill are kind of similar to the ones we have in the last bill that we talked about, where it's not specific to just the LGBTQ community. There are what we consider this listing of protected classes. It's the same listing that we have in our anti-discrimination law that applies here. So your marital status, your national origin, we included individuals' HIV statuses as well. So it really was this comprehensive look coming from that knowledge base that we know that there's a particular issue with the LGBTQ population, but it's also this understanding that also in the state, through our stakeholdering, that we heard issues related to foster parents with disabilities and their ability to successfully foster youth based off of discriminatory practices that have been in place prior. So it's taking kind of that holistic approach and trying to make sure we can have the best outcomes. And then Candace and Sam also kind of highlighted the training aspects. So what we really did there, right, it's to understand that foster parents are opening their homes or opening their hearts, right? They, at the end of the day, they want to do the best for the children that they can. And for us, it was looking at how can we give them the best tools in the best possible way to do this. So we sat down with the folks over at the Department of Human Services who had actually won for the past 2 years awards from the Human Rights Council for their inclusive work in the space, to figure out what are those trainings that they are doing to help inform their parents that they think are successful, and then putting those in the statute, and also creating some additional ones that we thought would be beneficial, not only to LGBTQ youth, but to youth across the board that could potentially end up in a foster parent's home. So it really came from this place of making sure that our foster parents in the state have the best tools possible so they can engage and have conversations that they maybe never had in their life with a youth that could be coming out to them, right, in those particular situations, or making sure that they understand the life skills that a youth going through their care should have at different age groups. So just want to kind of expand out some of the focus areas in the bill that we particularly had interest in.
Thank you. We have another question that just came in through the Q&A. Are private religious-based adoption agencies governed by this bill?
I can take that one. So the mechanism that we have to ensure protections are based off if entities are receiving state funding. So getting back to this most basic notion that if you're using public funds, if you're using our taxpayer money, you should not be discriminatory in your practices. So if there is an entity in the state that operates privately and only uses private funds, it would not address them or would not impact them. But what we find is that most across the board, these entities have contracts with either county or state level entities and do receive that funding. So that's also why there was a strategy with using that particular funding mechanism to make sure we could have those protections across the board. And then there's a coalition of 16 foster care agencies in the state that support the legislation, and 2 of them are directly religiously affiliated as well. So.
I'm going to jump back in to the little bit past question of like what else people should know. I think it's important to know that LGBTQ people are more likely to adopt. The reality is that foster parenting is great, and I believe in honoring first families and kids going home when that is the safest place for them to be for a variety of reasons, is to keep those family connections. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. Individuals don't always get to go back to their first families. And so knowing that there are people who are not only capable and willing to do foster care, but capable and willing to say, this is person that I'm going to bring into my family long-term is so important, because so many of our kids are aging out and not having that support as soon as their foster care years end. And so being able to give them stability, not only in that time, but long-term stability is really, really important to me.
Yeah, and just affirming that this is a way of becoming a parent and expanding one's family in our community. Foster care and adoption is one way of supporting young people in our community, and being able to let the love that you have within yourself and within a partnership potentially expand and bring others in. And so if that's what we understand families as the expansion, the expanding of love, and the bringing in of others, I think that there's a real beauty in creating a family in that way, and making sure that people of all sorts of identities have the capacity to create family in whatever way is the best for them and their particular situation.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions from the audience right now? If not, I think that anything else you'd like to add, we're happy to hear. Great.
So y'all are in luck, since we are miraculously a few minutes ahead of time. Y'all are gonna get 2 songs for your break time. So if you need to grab a glass of water or anything else, I will give you 2 awesome songs to do that, and then we'll jump back in.
I'll be the last one standing, 2 hands in the air, I'm a champion. You'll be looking up at me when it's over. I live for the battle, I'm a soldier. Yeah, I'm a fighter like Rocky. Put your flag on your back like Ali.
possessed through the drama. H is for the hurt, but it's all for the honor. A is for my attitude, working through the patience. Money comes and goes, so the M is for motivation. Gotta stay consistent, the P is to persevere. The I is for integrity, innovative career. The O is optimistic, open and never shut. And the N is necessary, cause I'm never giving up. See, they ask me how I did it, I just did it from the heart. Crushing the competition, been doing it from the start. They say that every champion is all about his principles. Carry.
I am invincible, unbreakable, unstoppable, unshakable. They knock me down, I get up again. I am the champion. You're gonna dominate. You can't hurt me now. I can't feel the pain. I was made for this. Yeah, I was born to win. I am the champion.
Surpassed all rivals. It's all about who wants it the most. Fight for what we believe in. That's what champions are made of. When I was in the 3rd grade, I thought that I was gay, cause I could draw. My uncle was, and I kept my room straight. I told my mom, tears rushing down my face. She's like, Ben, you've loved girls since before pre-K. Tripping. Yeah, I guess she had a point, didn't she? Bunch of stereotypes all in my head. I remember doing the math, like, yeah, I'm good at Little League. A preconceived idea of what it all meant. But those that like the same sex had the characteristics. The right-wing conservatives think it's a decision.
This really joint, huge coalition effort to help make sure this bill passes. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Helen. And then Jamie Ray from Second Chance Center also joined us. Jamie, do you want to introduce yourself? And then we'll go to Dr. Robert Davis.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today. Yes, my name is Jamie Ray, and I lead the civic engagement efforts at the Second Chance Center. For those of you that aren't familiar with us, the Second Chance Center is a 501c3 nonprofit in North Aurora. We do wraparound services, and we assist people coming home from incarceration in really any way that you can think of.
Thanks so much. And finally, we have, but not least of all, I don't know what that saying is. Last but not least, there it is. We have Dr. Robert Davis with us, who's a close friend, and I'm just thrilled that he can be here.
Thank you so very much. Before I say my part, Jamie, the Second Chance Center is unbelievable. And I'm really hoping that, Second Chance Center will get to come to Denver and provide services for those reentering community here. Latif is, I'm probably his biggest fan in the city. So it's really good to see you here. With that being said, and it all ties together, I am the project coordinator for the task force to reimagine policing and public safety in Denver. It arose, of course, out of the George Floyd protests and just the realization that we need to have a complete overhaul, not just the policing, which we've been looking at for years, but really looking at public safety as a whole. And when we talk about public safety and what is the main takeaway from the task force, I think the definition of what public safety is, for too many years, public safety and policing have been synonymous. And the reality of the matter is the way communities should be, whether it's a poor community or whether it's a more affluent community, the way communities should be is that policing has the least role in public safety. So we came up with a definition at the task force of what public safety is. I'm going to share it and then I'll stop. Public safety, definition of public safety is public safety ensures that all members of the community decide how to organize a social environment that provides the freedom to live and thrive with the protection and support of social, physical, mental, and economic well-being. Safety is not a function of armed paramilitary forces with a proven track record of racism and violence. Public safety prevents, reduces, and heals harm. And I think that really captures why we need to focus on public safety and not just trying to develop a kind of gentler police force.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think that definition is an excellent lead in to one of the questions that I have. It's the one question I have for all the panelists, and then we have a few questions individually. But this question is, how does this bill, Senate Bill 62, jail population management, connect with one's ability to raise children in a safe and sustainable environment? I'm also going to allow, like, if you guys want to talk a little bit about like criminal justice reform in general and talk about how that overlaps with parenting and raising children in a safe environment, that would be great as well. So feel free, I guess, who wants to take this one first?
I can go ahead.
Perfect.
With this one. Yeah, so I think this bill in criminal justice has a huge impact on being able to parent in a safe environment. I mean, for a number of reasons. One, just the fact of overpolicing in general creates a unsafe environment for parenting, especially when you get to the age of this preteen and teenage years. I think we tend to forget that when we're talking about parenting, we're not only talking about parenting young elementary school age kids, we're also talking about parenting preteens and teenagers. And especially in underserved communities or communities that are over policed, this is a big target population. So, being able to let your son or daughter walk to their friend's house in the evening, walking back from playing basketball or going to the park or to study groups, all of those things, they become more dangerous when you have this over policing. Whether you go up to the 7-Eleven to get some Skittles, it's all these ideas that just doesn't create a safe environment for parents to let their kids be kids in neighborhoods where a lot of kids are able to do these things in neighborhoods that aren't over policed or that aren't, targeted by police brutality. And then the other end of that is when we have parents that are constantly getting taken out of the picture, especially on these low-level crimes, and they're getting held before even being found guilty. Not only can that possibly take one parent out of the home, it could potentially take the only parent out of the home, which is a big issue as well. We know it's an issue if you have a 2-parent household and all of a sudden it's only one income, one parent at home and all of that. But for a lot of it, it is a 1-parent household to begin with. So not only are you just taking a parent out, you're taking the only parent out, you're taking the only income out, you're taking the only stability in that child's life out. And for something that could be avoided, out of the court system, out of jails, and that aspect. So I think this bill all around would absolutely create a safer, and more supported environment for parents in a lot of these, neighborhoods and over-policed neighborhoods we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jamie. Does anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, one of the major things about the task force is that we have 5 strategies on how we improve public safety. And one of those strategies is to minimize the interaction between law enforcement and the criminal court system with members of the community. And this right here does really helps in that regard, in that we really want to cut down on the number of individuals, that are harassed by police, but second of all, that actually enter into the criminal court system. If we can prevent people from entering into the criminal court system in the first place, then we will cut down a lot of the challenges that we're currently facing with our entire carceral system.
Right, I love that. And I think working on the task force, one of the things that I learned is the intercept model. So there's all these points along the intercept model about where people interact with law enforcement. One of those intercepts is intercept 0. And so if you can actually minimize the interaction between the community and law enforcement from the beginning, I think that also helps kind of reform the criminal justice system. Yeah, thank you. Helen, do you want to jump in?
So in Colorado, there are over 20,000 kids who have a parent in prison or jail.
Helen, do you want to try, your sound got a little messed up. Do you want to try like muting and unmuting?
Yeah.
We're kind of robot-y.
Does it sound any better?
It doesn't. Let me see if it's like an echo.
Here, if I leave and come back, it'll fix it. I can do that really quickly.
Thank you. We'll pull you back in.
Okay, and so let's see. So I think Helen's gonna come back in. I'm trying to read this question right now. Because we did get a question from the audience. We'll hold that till the end. Alrighty.
Is it better now?
Much better, yeah.
Great. Sorry about that. Zoom is so fun. So I was saying 20,000 kids in Colorado have a parent in jail or prison. So bringing home any of those parents would have a huge impact on people's lives, especially when people are incarcerated pre-trial. They risk losing their housing, their jobs, and custody of their kids. So it's further destabilizing people, and it's really destabilizing their families too. And I just want to share the story of Jared Thistle. Jared lived in Alamosa, and he was incarcerated on a $5,000 bond for theft under $500, even though both the judge and district attorney recommended that he be released without cash bond. Because he could not pay that, he was left in jail, and he was detoxing alone for 3 days before he died by suicide. And he was a dad, he had a kid. So that's a very intense story, but suicide is one of the leading causes of death behind bars. And just thinking of the trauma that causes, not just for that person, but for their entire families who are hurt by a system where he never needed to be in jail. He was not a public safety risk. And that's what this bill is trying to do. Under this bill, he would have not received a cash bond. So I really think that highlights how needed reform is in this system, because it just causes so much harm to so many families across the state.
Thank you, Helen. And then before I go to questions for Robert and Jamie, I do have one question for you, Helen. Can you talk about the background of this bill, including the study that led to it and kind of just the story behind this bill?
Yes. So during COVID-19, we saw that there was a drop in jail populations across the state. And so what we were interested in seeing is what was driving this drop. Sheriffs across the state were suddenly taking actions and actively managing their jail. District attorneys were recommending more personal recognizance bonds instead of cash bonds. And there was a movement across the state to reduce the number of people incarcerated because there were so many cases behind bars and people dying. And so we released a report that found that there was a 40% decrease in our jail population statewide. So it dropped to levels not seen since the 1990s. And there were on average 6,000 fewer people in jail each day. So that's so many people who can stay at home with their families and resolve their court cases out from behind bars. And so we looked at the policies that were driving that and wondered what of those policies we could implement past COVID. Out of all the horrors of COVID, maybe there was this silver lining in that we were able to see that we can operate with so many fewer people behind bars and the sky didn't fall. You know, there was no correlation between which jails depopulated the most and any change in crime. And so that's what led to the origins of this bill, was talking with many stakeholders in this 9-month coalition process to see which policies we could implement moving forward. And the two foundations were to increase summons instead of arrest. So just telling people when their court date is instead of bringing them into jail. And this would hopefully reduce the number of potentially dangerous interactions between police and community members on these low-level offenses when they're incarcerated for no reason, and then decreasing the use of cash bonds. And those were the two policies that we saw led to the change in jail population, and that we decided to work with many partners to try to implement in this bill.
Yeah, thank you. And I think there's a couple things I love about the story behind this bill. One of the things is the way that people across the law enforcement system were able to come work together. So these are people who normally don't work together. So that includes sheriffs, that includes judges, that includes district attorneys. This was a system-wide effort that dropped the jail population with, a significant amount. And so all of these people who were doing their jobs and kind of existed in their own silos had to come together and work across their systems to support each other and change the system. So I think that's one of the examples that shows why this bill is super needed, and is drawn from the law enforcement community. And then I think the other thing that I love about this bill is just the way that Helen mentioned that it's a silver lining coming out, from all of the horrors that COVID brought, that this is the possibility to look at things and say, this is the way that, things don't have to be the way that they currently are. I think that's very similar to the task force that Dr. Robert Davis is leading. And so Dr. Robert, can you just talk about like what inspired the task force, and then what are some of your key takeaways from the task force? And then also after I ask Jamie's question, we'll come to community questions in a second. I know there are a bunch of questions coming in, so hang tight.
So as I was sharing earlier, the main thing that inspired the task force, of course, was the George Floyd incident. And I want to tie it together with the question that I see in the chat, if that's okay, which is, my community has come out against this bill. They feel that crime will be encouraged. Many of the crimes mentioned are more serious felonies. They offer as an example, someone breaks into your car, police are watching and can do nothing, person walks away. Actually, that's not what the bill says at all. But what we have to really ask ourselves is this question. Not what is it that the police shouldn't be doing? The question has to be, what are the circumstances where someone with a gun needs to respond? That flips the question to say, where do we need someone with a gun responding? Okay, hostage situations, kidnaps, of course, but murder, a fleeing murderer, all those type of things, we get it. This bill does not outlaw that. So that's the first thing. Second thing, the second question around this, and which we see as well, is how often does someone break into someone's car and a police officer is standing there while they're breaking into the car? When was the last time that a police officer was around to actually prevent a crime? That's just a reality. Police do not prevent crimes and actions. They investigate crimes and they arrest the offenders. They are not out here stopping crimes. That is one of the biggest misinformation tools or misnomers that has been put out about police in the first place, that they stop crime. It's impossible for them to stop crime unless they, how they're going to stop murders. How do they know when a murder is going to happen? How do they know when a robbery is going to happen? So what they do is they respond after the fact. And so this bill does not say police officers cannot respond after the fact. The second thing, again, is we need to ask ourselves as a society, when is it necessary for someone with a gun to respond to a situation? And until we're prepared to answer that question, we're going to have difficulties. Was it necessary, and think about this, was it necessary for someone with a gun to respond to an allegation of a $20 counterfeit bill? Did someone with a gun need to show up to that scene? Did 4 or 5 men with guns need to come and handle that situation? If we did not have 4 or 5 men with guns showing up to that situation of an allegation of a counterfeit bill, George Floyd would not be dead. And that is a factual statement.
Right. And I think that Jamie can definitely speak to this, because just the notion that law enforcement does not prevent crime, I can speak personally as a victim of crime, that, the police did not prevent that crime from happening to me. I know Jamie can also speak. A lot of the people that Second Chance Center is working to empower, a lot of the FIPs, the formerly incarcerated persons, were also victims of crime. So there's this incorrect notion that survivors, criminals are also not survivors of crime. And there's notion that kind of separates those two. Jamie, can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, what you said is 100% correct. I would say majority, if not almost all of our participants were victims of a crime at some point. A lot of that comes before they reach the criminal justice system. A lot of that comes within the criminal justice system. I think we forget that part when we talk a lot about incarcerated people and formerly incarcerated people. We like to think about, the early childhood or maybe what happened before the crime life, things like that. But we also forget that a lot of people get further victimized within the system. So it becomes this even more hostile of a cycle. When you are victimized and you commit a crime and then you're in, the custody of the state, you're in prison, you're back on the streets, whatever, you're experiencing homelessness, things like that maybe the system helped create like worse for you, I guess, is the way to say it, that then the victimizing continues. Being on the streets, you get victimized by police, correctional officers, other people in your community. They go hand in hand, and it's definitely something that we have to consider, with the population and how we're serving these communities. Because what you said is 100% correct, that I would say that majority of our clients were victims of crime, if not all of them.
Yeah, thank you. And then one last question for Jamie specifically, and then Helen, of course, before the end of the panel, I want to talk about how we as a community here can support this bill and what we can do to pass it. But drawing back to kind of the purpose of this panel and talking about the intersections of this bill in criminal justice and the ability to parent your children in a healthy and safe environment. Jamie, how does Second Chance Center work to empower and support parents upon release?
Yeah, so this is, it's an interesting question because it has a lot of components. To really support parents is supporting the individual. You have all these great programs that you can have for kids, but having that secure and stable parental structure is really, really important. So we do some reintegration with family members, being able to see your kids after you come home, things of that nature. But we really focus on getting that person stable. Being a parent myself, I know how important stability is, knowing when my paychecks are going to come in so I can feed my son, knowing my schedule for work so I know when I can get him to school, who can pick him up, if he doesn't have school, who's going to watch him that day, all the way from my mental health. Having resources around getting the stability of my mental health is important too, for raising my son. So that's the same thing with our clients. Having the wraparound services that we have on-site mental health clinicians, so people can see one-on-one therapists when they get home to work on any of those issues to kind of get that mental stability, ready to see their kids, especially when they've been gone for a long time. There tends to be a little bit of distrust between child and parent, understandably, when when a parent's ripped out of your life like that. So a lot of the therapy that we do is talking about that reunification and talking about repairing that trust. But again, as we know, actions speak louder than words. So a lot of the times you can get all that mental health, but it comes from the stability of showing your child that you're ready to be in their life. That means getting your own apartment or your own transitional house, anything like that we help you get. Getting clothing, toy drives to help people get, their kids' Christmas presents around Christmas time. Food, we do food drives all the time. We constantly have a food pantry. We have tons of food for kids so people can get plenty of food and clothing for their children as well. We do barbecues during the summer where we try to make a big emphasis on families to, again, encourage that reunification of parents and their children. And then we also are going to be starting a Parents on a Mission, which is a family group, again, to help parents really understand, how to parent, especially when you've been gone for a while. So I'd say the biggest way that we assist parents in staying in the community with their kids is assisting that individual and creating the stability of that individual's life, so then that can transition into their child's life as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think I'm going to move us. There's a question that Melissa Garland put. My town paper is using scare tactics against this bill. Please directly address how this bill will not put the general community at risk. And just saying, I think this question is also in relation to some of the questions we've been getting in the chat. So I'm going to kick that over to anyone who wants to answer. It looks like Helen, you're ready to go.
Yeah. So first of all, there has been a lot of misinformation about this bill. So this bill does not limit arrests or bond setting for any high-level felonies, statutory crimes of violence, domestic violence, any high-level felony like you're thinking of. And a coalition amendment removed auto theft, so the car breaking in example. And all serious felonies are completely unaffected by this bill. So I just want to say that the police, even for these misdemeanors and low-level felonies where an arrest is not required, so where they can issue a summons instead of an arrest for these low-level felonies and misdemeanors, even in those cases for low-level felonies, the police can still arrest if they think that there is a serious safety risk or risk of reoffense. And you might be wondering, why are there some low-level felonies in the bill? It's because the crime for which George Floyd was killed for in Colorado is a Class 5 felony. And so removing that from the bill would leave so many people who are not a safety risk still in the, still facing these potentially deadly interactions with police. So all this bill is trying to do is to have police stop and think before they just arrest as a knee-jerk reaction to any offense. Is this person actually a public safety risk? Does this person actually need to be detained? And hopefully summons for many of these low-level offenses that, as the result of decades of mass incarceration, have become these felonies. Do they actually need to be arrested, or can they just receive a summons? So you've heard maybe a lot from some police who are drumming up misinformation about the bill, but really this is just saying that in the wake of very clear misuses of force and clear examples where police are killing people over these low-level offenses, a summons is the right and appropriate response, not an arrest. And so I can drop in the chat a really helpful resource where we kind of go over some of these myths and how true they are.
Yeah, and I actually put the FAQ and the fact sheet in the chat. We really want to make sure that we're addressing this misinformation. And I think the most important thing to remember about this bill too is that it's based on a study that the ACLU conducted over the summer with findings, and those findings from what the sheriffs already did over COVID are what dictated the text of the bill. So it's just about time to wrap up. I want to toss it back to Helen real quick. And thank you to Robert and Jamie for joining us. I think this was just an amazing conversation. Helen, how can we support your work to pass this bill? What are 2 things that we can all go do right now?
Thank you so much. So we are trying to get this bill out of the Senate, and we just need 18 votes for it to pass.
We lost you.
So I'm dropping in.
Sorry, you keep muting.
Sorry about that. I dropped in the chat. If you can contact Senator Fields, who's one of our last final key votes that we need to pass the bill. So I just dropped the link there, and it's a really helpful, great resource for you to quickly email her and help us make sure that this bill passes safely out of the Senate. And we do have Spanish versions of the fact sheet and the FAQ document on our website. And I'm getting some other DMs. So I will drop my email in the chat if people have other questions about this bill. But if you could contact Senator Fields, that would be really helpful. Thank you so much.
Perfect. And I want to thank all of you for joining us for this panel. I think too often we don't talk about the importance of the intersections of criminal justice, of raising children, of getting housing, getting employment, seeking education. And I think in order to make changes in the system, we really have to highlight that the criminal justice system affects all areas of these issues that we work on. So thank you to all of you for joining us today and for just highlighting that. And I'm going to kick it back over to Sam, I believe. But again, thank you so much. And I think Helen's including her email, so don't hesitate to reach out. And we encourage you to participate and take action on this really important bill because this is really going to move things forward in terms of justice in the criminal justice system. So thank you again.
Thanks so much, Mel. We're going to move on to our last and final bill, and that will be And I'm going to pull up those three panelists for you now. So they'll give a short introduction, and then from there, they will let you know a little bit about the bill and why this particular bill is important to them. So just give me 1 second so I can make sure we can see our three individuals. And Catherine, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll roll it up and we'll continue with the other panelists.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I've been listening on the back end, and I just feel really honored and surrounded by such great people doing really amazing work. So thank you for having us. I'm Catherine Riley, she, her, hers, ella, and I am the policy manager with the Colorado Organization for Latina Opportunity and Reproductive Rights. I am Latina, I have had an abortion, I use contraception, and it has provided me with the decision to make my own choices around life and to be where I am today. And so I'm just really happy to share with you all reproductive justice and the right to not have children.
And I'm going to pass it over to Raquel.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Raquel Lane Ariano, and I'm the policy manager with the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition. Also want to send a thanks to you all for having us here to talk about reproductive access and how that is also a really big part of immigrant rights. And yeah, I'm really excited to have also Laura on with us, who's also part of our team.
Last but not least, if you want to give a brief introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Segura. I'm she, her pronouns, and I, just like Catherine say, being able to use my rights of choosing when I have children, when I not, and what to do with my sexuality. And I'm as a mother, I encourage my kids to do the same, and also to everyone in my community, Ashley. And yeah, so I'm part of CIRC, and very happy to be here today. So thank you.
I am so grateful that y'all were able to give the time and we could hear more about this bill. Can you talk a little bit, and this is for all of y'all, but what is part of that access? We talk about the words access to care a lot in reproductive health and reproductive justice, but we don't always break that down to what does that mean for someone to have access to care. So I'm gonna just open it up. I'm gonna, for ease of, we know who to unmute at the right time, I'll let Catherine go first and we'll kind of continue to go in that order, but you all can jump in or pass as you see fit.
Thank you. Yeah, I think for us, the biggest thing at Color is that legality does not always equal access. So just because there are programs and services available doesn't mean that our community members know about them, doesn't mean that our community members in rural areas can access these things. So for example, 300,000 people of reproductive capacity in Colorado live in a contraceptive desert. That means that they have one clinic per 1,000 people, and 10,000 of those people live without any clinic in their county. And so for us, if we're not focused on the most marginalized, if we're not focusing on the people that have the least amount of access, then we're missing the point altogether. And so our bill around undocumented folks, we know that Latinas have twice the rate of unintended pregnancies. And so that's where our focus is. That's our community, that's who we are, and that's who we're trying to provide access so that when we do address barriers for the most marginalized, we all come up.
Thank you for that. I think it's so important for people to really understand why it's important to centralize marginalized individuals, that it really is a reality of if care becomes more accessible for that group, it becomes more accessible across the board. Raquel, did you want to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's other elements of access too that are really important to name. I think there's a lot of trust that has been broken with our undocumented community when they access resources. And so part of making sure things are accessible is making sure to think 3 steps ahead and make sure that that information is protected and that people are never putting themselves or their families at risk when they, when they do apply for programs that they qualify for. Because we've seen reproductive, people accessing reproductive health right be targeted by ICE in different states. Not necessarily, there aren't any present examples that come to mind in Colorado, but I think access to me, I think part of it is breaking down fear that people have that is a justified fear that exists for a reason.
And for me, the question why shouldn't be, because if we respect each other and we respect our rights, we shouldn't be asking ourselves why of this, why of that. We shouldn't have a why in the first place. That's the answer of the question from me. But I'm gonna read a poem because I speak too much and this is the way I minimize myself. So it say, out of my mind, she's crazy, they say, and I will tell you why. When I speak the truth, they say I lie. When I speak up, they say I'm out of control. When I say what I think, they say I'm out of this world. When I say how I feel, they told me to shut up. When I express myself, they say we don't like you. When I show them the invisible and what is possible, they say you don't fit in here. When I prove them wrong, they say you don't belong. When I say I'm here, they say you must go. When they need someone to rely on, they look at me. When they see me happy, they ask themselves why. When they see me calm, they ask themselves how. When they see me laughing and crying, they ask themselves, now what? When they see me passing by, they ask themselves, is she coming? Is she going? When they see me working, they see me standing up for all of us. They ask themselves what she's doing, and to themselves, how much courage. When they finally see me, they came to me and asked me, how are you doing? Who are you? What are you doing here? And that's when I give them the chance to know me. I love myself and for who I am. And I have always been myself. I live my life the best way I know. And I'm not crazy. I'm out of my mind. That's who I am, and I always am. And they say, tell me more. They say, come sit down with us. You are welcome here. We admire you. And I say to myself, they are crazy. Please don't judge me and don't get me wrong. These people are of this world. Don't you agree with me? Ha ha ha. I can show you how things are for me in this crazy world, and it's all right. It's what it is, and I will tell you why. You are not out of this world. We are in our mind. I can show you my world. You don't see this every day because you are not involved with the issues that affect all in this world. This is me showing them another world, the invisible, the impossible. Here is me one more time. Come and go, but not alone anymore. Be yourself and never change. What is in your mind, all your thoughts can be possible. Speak up, all your thoughts, that's what they say today. The world needs us, I say to them, and I say to you, just be happy and come too. No more lies of who you are. Be yourself and be proud of you. Don't be scared to be different. We all are. This is why you need to be out of your mind. Don't you think? Ha ha ha.
Thank you so much for sharing your art and your voice with us. I'm going to challenge you to never minimize yourself too often. That is what we're encouraged to do. And I'm so grateful to have you in this space and to recognize that we really do need to be listening to each other and building relationships and being authentic, which is what I personally felt in what you were saying. So I appreciate you sharing that with us.
No, you're welcome.
Catherine, I'm curious, why did CALOR decide now was the time to focus on a bill like this?
First of all, thank you, Laura. That was so amazing. I'm glad that I got to hear your poem. So CALOR actually has been working on this bill for a few years now, or a variation of this bill. We tried about 2 years ago to bring Medicaid expansion of all reproductive health services for undocumented folks, and the fiscal note, the amount of money attached to that bill was just way too high. We didn't feel it was too high. The state felt it was too high. And then the next year was the pandemic. And so this year we really chose to focus on the one thing that we felt had the highest amount of cost savings, but giving the most amount of impact. And so for us, that was really access to contraceptives. During the pandemic, however, we learned that there was a big study done around people's desire to delay pregnancy. And so we're really happy that we chose this avenue, because we're now learning, let me just pull this up, especially around Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So overall, 1/3 of women want to delay pregnancy and want fewer children because of the pandemic. But what we're seeing is Black women are at 44%, Latinas at 48%, in comparison to white women at 28%. Queer women are at 46%, straight women at 33%, and then lower income women are also wanting to delay at higher rates than higher income women. And so we really feel like at a time when many of our community members are essential workers, they don't have the luxury to take time off work or to stay inside and protect themselves from COVID. We're seeing folks, a lot of our community members, losing jobs and just being in really tough and stressful situations and not getting the help that they deserve. We really feel like this could not have come at a better time. And so we're really proud to be advancing this legislation that will allow people to make decisions about their own bodies and to take care of themselves and their families.
Thank you so much. Raquel, I feel like we're kind of dancing around it, so I'm just going to jump in and ask it. How do you see reproductive rights being important as we're working for immigrant rights?
I think we've touched on it. And Catherine, you did a good job outlining this when we first started, but I see reproductive rights have everything to do with choice, right? And being able to define the future you want for your families. And like so often, immigrants are robbed of choice. We saw that happen in Georgia with forced hysterectomies on immigrant women. And we see it happen all the time when immigrant women or immigrant families, right? Immigrant folks who need access to reproductive health care have to choose between taking care of their families or putting themselves at risk to apply for programs, right? Or even to do things like routine checkups to make sure that they're okay. I saw a study recently that says, immigrant women are more likely to suffer from cervical cancer because that's a routine checkup. And if you don't have access to go to a clinic that you can afford, that has a program that you qualify for, then you're not going to go out of your way on top of all of the other issues and things that our immigrant families are dealing with on a daily basis, especially right now when immigrant communities have been excluded from federal relief. They have had a much harder time accessing housing benefits during the pandemic and have also suffered some of the biggest losses in the industries that they work in healthcare or in healthcare, in hospitality, in the restaurant industry. And so I think for me, it's all very connected. Immigrant rights and reproductive rights are about having and making sure that everyone has access to the choice of how they want to guide their choices on, whether or not to have a family, how to take care of their own bodies before, during, and after pregnancy. And unfortunately, there are a ton of barriers that exist at the state level and at the federal level that do not allow immigrant women to have those choices and to have those options. And so I'm really glad to see Senate Bill 9 advancing, because it's, you know, it's well past time that we start to open some of those doors. And we have in the past in Colorado, but there's still so many resources that just are not expanded to everyone, regardless of their immigration status.
Thank you so much. And I feel like you already gave us a lead into my question for Laura, but as other people want to jump in, please do. How do you see that immigration status changing how people choose to access reproductive health care?
Yeah, for me is everything is related with health. And if you don't feel physically well, mostly you stay in a mental, you become into a mental state of no be well. And it's like you stay in a relationship because you don't feel well, you cannot provide for yourself or your children. And then that physical, that physical need to be covered by you abusing partner or whatever, and then it gets you in that track of be in a circle that you couldn't get out. And if you do, it's hardly because you don't have the resources, like Catherine say, is mostly we don't have the education first, the knowing yourself, knowing your body, knowing all the resources in your community. And plus, if you are came with the language barriers, that's when you get stuck. And with immigrants, that's where we at, that's where we are fighting for, to really respect our rights to be. And that's what it's all about. But yes, everything is relative with your status. Yes.
Thank you so much. I think that emphasis on education is so important. I know we talked earlier about if you have access, just because it's there doesn't mean you have access. So that piece of knowing that it's there and it being accessible for you, not just physically location wise, but also accessible with language is so important. So I appreciate you lifting that up. Catherine and Raquel, I want to give you the chance to answer that question as well, of how do you see that in the work that y'all do?
Yeah, I can be brief. The first thing that comes to mind on like things that might keep immigrants from accessing benefits, I think about, you know, the battle we had over the last 4 years with public charge rule, and how this isn't just reproductive benefits, but it had a chilling effect across any type of benefit that immigrant families were considering for themselves or for their children, even benefits that that they qualified for, you know. So because of the public charge rule, which for folks who might not know, it's a policy at the federal level that has existed for a long time, but basically says that if you are a public charge, or like you're going to be you know, using public benefits or in some way, the idea is like very classist, but the idea being that like if you are in some way like a burden to society, which is not obviously true, but that you could be barred from the ability to naturalize, the ability to become a citizen, or the ability to qualify for a green card. And so a lot of families decided, when public charge went into effect and they expanded the programs that qualify or that would disqualify you to eventually get your residency, many families just stopped getting any resources altogether for their entire families. So they were disenrolling children from things like free and reduced lunch, which has no bearing on public charge. Families were disenrolling from other programs like WIC or programs that they did qualify for. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of factors that people are balancing when they're considering which benefits they can access for their families. And unfortunately, when we have state or federal policies that are anti-immigrant, we see people retract from things that are even in their best interest because they're doing calculations for the long term on what's going to be most beneficial for their family. And when there's anti-immigrant policies, that can make people make decisions that aren't always, best for their health or for the health of their families.
I'm glad you brought up public charge, Raquel, because we've been getting a lot of questions about that with our bill, and it creates a new state program. And so it wouldn't impact public charge at all, but there is so much distrust around that. And so I think for us, the biggest thing is around education and awareness. We've been doing a lot of messaging in English and in Spanish to let folks know what is available. And if and when this bill passes, we'll be doing a lot more of that as well to just let folks know what they can access. For us, it's really about that immigration status and documentation should not dictate the kind of care that is available to somebody. Undocumented folks and immigrants are often excluded from public healthcare options and affordable healthcare options, and that's just not okay. And so for us, really the long-term goal is to expand reproductive health services through Medicaid for undocumented folks, period. Right now, we're having to start with contraceptives because we understand the legislature works like that and just doing like little steps at a time. But our long-term goal is to get our communities access to affordable healthcare with the services that they need. I think we heard a lot of testimony when we were in our first committee from impacted community members who are foregoing rent, foregoing childcare, foregoing all these other necessary costs to pay for healthcare, or they are living in severe amounts of pain because they can't pay out of pocket to get an IUD taken out or to get some of this other care that they need that birth control would help with. And so for us, it's really just about like equity. What do our communities deserve and how can we get to that point?
Thank you all so much. I think what I heard and what you were saying is the reality of people aren't prioritizing their basic needs, whether that be from healthcare, whether that be for food or housing, because unfortunately the system is set up in a way that they have to make some pro-con situations and it doesn't always weigh the way that it should, where people are making the best decision. Last question I have for y'all, and then Mel will jump back on and do a little wrap up of what else people can do. But for this bill, or if people are interested in supporting individuals in the immigrant community, what can community members do?
I'll just go really quick. I think the biggest thing is to listen to the folks who are most marginalized, listen to the community members who are telling you, this is what I'm experiencing. These are the barriers that I'm facing. And I think from there, once you start to understand what other folks are going through, we can start to put our priorities around policy and around programs, kind of uplifting those folks, because like you said earlier, Sam, like if we uplift the most marginalized, we all come up. And I just think that that is really what folks can do, is start talking to other people and hear what they are going through.
Yeah, and I just say, absolutely, Catherine, I think listening to those who are most directly impacted first. And also, if you're part of an organization, plug into this work. We need your voices. And because, the legislators don't always want to hear from us advocates. It can mean a lot to have somebody speak to them, whether it's from a faith perspective or from an educator perspective, whatever perspective you come from, or line of work or life. I think it helps to have different voices in this fight. And so if you're already organized in your community in some way, there are ways for you to join this movement, to become members of our coalition, or to engage in bigger ways. So there are those opportunities too, and I would encourage folks to seek those.
Yeah, and I just gonna add, just be involved and be involved with, and with your own curiosity, you know, what get you in, what do you feel a part of, and why? And that's when the why came out, you know, the question turn around and say, why is this coming up or going on? And that will get you in somehow. So, yeah.
Before we close, I just want to give a little update too on the status of our bill. So SB 9 passed its first committee and we are headed to appropriations on Friday. We expect to pass there as well. And I think CIRC has a bill in approps on Friday too. There's a lot of us like New Era and Planned Parenthood and everyone in the same committee on Friday. So we got our friends with us. And then if anyone is looking to get involved with SB 9 in particular, we have a petition and we're also asking folks to call your legislators, ask them to fund the bill. And then, yeah, just follow us on our socials so you can reshare kind of our graphics and educational stuff. That's about it.
Thank you so much. So I already put the survey in the chat and we'll be sending that out as well as each of the orgs that spoke today. So you have an opportunity to know that the work that they're doing and how to connect with them out in the broader community. So I'm gonna let Mel give us our send off of like, what's next? Where are we going from here?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And seriously, thank you so much to this amazing panel. Lara, your poem was just such a beautiful way to center and frame the conversation. So thank you for sharing that with us. I think what I want to say about what's on the horizon, what can be done, is our intention when creating this event was trying to take a bill and frame the bill through different lenses. So we had the lead organization, we had a sponsoring or supporting organization, and then we tried to find an impacted voice. So my ask and my hope is that as you all move forward and participate in the legislative process, that you try to do the same, and that you take some time to research and dig into the bill. I think the more you can educate yourself before you advocate, the better partner and ally and advocate that you'll be. I think I do want to highlight that the HB 21-1072, that's the Equal Access Service, the foster care bill, was passed and signed by the governor. So that's a success that we can all celebrate. Gender identity expression, I believe, was also passed the Senate. It has not been signed by the governor, but it is well on its way. And so right now we're looking down at the remaining two bills, Senate Bill 62, the jail population bill, and then Senate Bill 09, the reproductive health care program that we just learned about. So I think hopefully this program inspired you to advocate for these bills through a reproductive justice framework and lens. I think I want to normalize showing up for a housing bill as a reproductive justice advocate. I want to normalize showing up for an education bill as a reproductive justice advocate. And I think, yeah, I think that whatever lens you can bring to the work, we encourage you to bring. We will send some follow-up actions. I think Catherine mentioned they have a form that you can sign and send in the follow-up email. We will send that form as well. As much as you were inspired by people's personal stories, please share your personal experience and your story when you speak and reach out to your legislator. That's what separates your advocacy from the next person's advocacy. So again, just thank you so much for everybody taking the time. We're just so grateful. I'm so inspired by this amazing community that we have. All the people here are working to make the world a better place. So I am leaving this event today just very uplifted. So thank you again. That's all I got. Sam, you want to?
Yeah, so Mel already said, but look out in your email. We have the contacts so you can continue to push forward these different bills, and also just get connected to the community that are every day doing the work. If you have the capacity and the desire to be a storyteller, that is an amazing opportunity, and we are always at Interfaith happy to support you and doing that and training you on that. So we will share more information with y'all, but thank you for taking the time into the amazing panels that we've had.
Yeah, and make sure you guys fill out that survey so we can continue to make these events happen and make these events better. Thank you, everybody.
And just lastly, I just want to say thank you all so much for being here. And we are a resource for you at any time. If you ever even feel inspired outside of what any of these bills are, our organizations are here to help you do that. And we're here to help guide you through that. So if you have questions, you need resources, anything you need, feel free to reach out to any of us, because we are here to help you navigate all of this to make a better world. So thank you so much.
Thank y'all. Have a great day.